In order to understand how the moon's phases are progressing, we can't just look at the moon's motion throughout one night, because the phases need more time to change, so we need to look at it from one evening to the next. Here we're looking at the moon's phases as seen from Earth. We have the sun that has just set on the western horizon. Notice that it says southwest on here, so the sun is almost in the west. We're in late February of some year, 2009 I have here. Doesn't really matter what year, what month we're in. I just want to talk about the phases here. So here we're looking at the moon, and when we look at the moon from one day to the next, 24 hours at a time, then we can see that it moves away from the sun in its west-east motion, and the further it moves away from the sun, the more of the moon we can see. And again, day after day, we can see that the moon becomes more and more full. Now it's virtually full. So here we can see the moon's phases nicely increasing from the sliver to the full moon phase. The further it moves away from the sun, because I'm going 24 hours at a time, the sun has still just set in the west every evening here, and the moon has now moved towards the east in its west-east motion. And we can also go to an hour later, so we actually have kind of darker sky another hour later. There we go. And then it continues on. And now we actually have to go late into the night in order to see the other phases. So here, after it had been the full moon, we're now getting into the gibbous phase. And now the moon is in a half moon. We're so late in the night, this is almost morning, and I have to catch the moon beneath the horizon. So I'm going to go a little bit later in the morning. We're going to get back to blue sky there, and we're going to be back at the sliver phase the closer the moon gets to the sun. Again, this is really early in the morning, relatively early in the morning, and the moon becomes more and more of a sliver again as it approaches the new moon phase. So what we can see from this one here is that apparently the moon's phases depend on where in its orbit the moon is in relation to the sun. Now we're looking at Earth and Moon from space. It's the same date at which the Moon's phases had started as we were looking at it from Earth. It's at the 26th of February, but because in space we have to change to universal time, that's why it looks it's a few hours later. Either way, that's not important for the Moon's phases. It's the same date. And here we can see we're looking at the Earth and the Moon, and obviously the Sun is in this direction here to the upper right, lighting half of the Earth and half of the Moon, And when we remember what we saw only a sliver of the moon from Earth's perspective, and that's because of our angle. We see most of the dark side of the moon and very little of the light side. Let's go 24 hours later, and as we can see, the moon orbits Earth. The sun apparently is in the same direction. But here a few days later, this sure looks like we have now a half moon, because we see equally half of the moon being in dark and half of the moon being lit up. And here we get into the gibbous phase, and then over here we have now the full moon phase. The moon is not directly behind Earth. That would be lunar eclipse. I made sure that when I record these moon phases example that we're not in a lunar eclipse. Instead, the moon orbits above the Earth's or below the Earth's shadow. So here we truly have a full moon, like we do every month, and then we go ahead 24 hours and we're back to the gibbous phase. And here we are having again the half moon, and here we're back to the sliver, and that's what we saw earlier in the early morning sky.